I never meant for things to spiral like this. When I first met Jason, it wasn't supposed to be anything more than a distraction, a way to feel something again. My marriage to Daniel had become stale, predictable. Just another part of the monotonous cycle of my life. He was a good man, I won't deny that. Kind, responsible, hard-working. But those things that once made me love him had turned into the very things that suffocated me. I wanted excitement, passion, and Jason gave me that. It started as harmless flirting at work. Jason was bold, confident, and, most importantly, he made me feel wanted. Not just loved out of obligation, but desired. Every glance, every lingering touch, every whispered joke made me crave more. The stolen moments in the office break room turned into late-night conversations, and before I knew it, I was lying to Daniel about where I was, who I was with. First I felt guilt, real guilt. But with every excuse Daniel accepted without question, every night he came home exhausted and barely looked at me, the guilt faded into justification. I deserved happiness, didn't I? Then came the house. When Daniel's grandmother passed, I knew it was going to be a problem. He saw that old Victorian place as some kind of sacred relic, a connection to his past. To me it was a burden. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life fixing up some creaky old house while Daniel reminisced about childhood summers on the porch. I wanted a modern apartment in the city, a life that didn't feel like it belonged to someone decades older than me. I knew if I brought it up, Daniel would never listen. He was sentimental to a fault, blind to practicality. So I talked to Jason. Jason was the one who first suggested selling it behind Daniel's back. At first I thought he was joking, but the more we talked about it, the more it made sense. Daniel was too distracted with work to even notice what was happening right under his nose. The house was legally his, sure, but I had just as much right to decide what kind of life we were going to live. If I waited for him to come around, I'd be stuck in that house forever, watching the dust settle around me while he clung to his grandmother's memory. I won't pretend it was easy. There were moments when I hesitated, moments when I thought about telling Daniel. But Jason had a way of making me feel sure, like I was finally taking control of my own future. He found a buyer, someone willing to pay in cash, no questions asked. It was perfect. No paperwork tied directly to Daniel, nothing he could undo once the sale was final. Jason handled the details and all I had to do was play my part. Act like nothing had changed, keep Daniel distracted, make sure he never caught on. The night we finalized everything, Jason took me out to celebrate. It was a high I had never felt before. The thrill of getting away with something, the rush of knowing I was finally free. Free from that house, from Daniel's predictable routines, from the life that felt like a slow death. I remember laughing, drinking, feeling invincible. Jason kissed me, told me we were going to start over, just the two of us. No more hiding. No more pretending. And then everything fell apart. Daniel found out. I don't know how, but he did. Maybe he noticed the missing paperwork. Maybe the buyer got cold feet and reached out to him. All I know is that when I walked into our apartment that night, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, a piece of paper in his hand, his expression unreadable. My stomach dropped. I knew before he even spoke that this was it. He didn't yell. He didn't throw accusations. He just looked at me and said 7 words that made my blood run cold. They forgot to read the fine print. And that's when I knew Jason and I had made a mistake. A huge, irreversible mistake. My mouth went dry as Daniel's words settled in the air between us. He didn't look angry, not in the way I expected. No shouting, no accusations, just that quiet, eerie calm that sent chills down my spine. I opened my mouth to speak, to lie, to do something, but he held up the paper in his hand and shook his head. "Don't," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Just sit." I hesitated for a second before lowering myself onto the chair across from him, my heart hammering in my chest. Jason had told me everything was airtight. He had assured me that the sale was final, that there was no way Daniel could undo it. But Daniel wasn't stupid, and that was what scared me the most. He laid the paper flat on the table and slid it toward me. "Read it," he said. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, my eyes scanning the words that blurred together from sheer panic. And then I saw it. The clause. My stomach turned to ice. Daniel's grandmother had been cautious, maybe even paranoid, but above all, she had been sharp. Sharp enough to include a stipulation in the deed that the house could not be sold without his explicit signature. one that had to be notarized in person. No power of attorney, no forged documents, no loopholes. I felt my pulse pound in my ears as my mind raced. Jason had handled the paperwork. Jason had been the one to set up the deal. Had he even checked this? Had he just assumed that because I was Daniel's wife, my name carried enough weight to push it through? I forced myself to swallow to keep my voice even. I don't understand. I lied, setting the paper down carefully like it might burn me. Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying me. His expression unreadable. You understand, he said, his voice quiet. You just don't know how to talk your way out of it. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my face neutral, but I could feel the panic rising. If the sale wasn't valid, if the buyer realized they'd been tricked, they weren't going to just walk away. This wasn't some minor misunderstanding. This was fraud. I needed to get to Jason. I needed to figure out if he knew about this before Daniel could make a move. Look, I said, exhaling slowly, trying to regain some control. I don't know what you think happened, but... He cut me off with a sharp laugh, the first real emotion I had seen from him since I walked in. Don't, he said again, shaking his head. Just don't. You already sold it, right? You and Jason? You went behind my back, signed papers that weren't yours to sign, took money that wasn't yours to take. You thought you'd get away with it. He leaned back, folding his arms. So tell me, Vanessa, what's your plan now? I felt my stomach churn. My plan had been simple: sell the house, take the money, and leave. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. I hadn't planned on being with Daniel much longer, not after everything with Jason became serious. I was just waiting for the right moment. The house was supposed to be my safety net, the money I needed to start fresh, but now everything was unraveling. Jason had promised this would be easy, that Daniel was too trusting, too wrapped up in work to notice anything until it was too late. But Jason didn't know Daniel like I did. He underestimated him. And now I was paying for it. I reached for my phone, but before I could even unlock it, Daniel's voice stopped me. Call him, he said, nodding toward the phone. Go ahead. Ask him if he knew about this. Ask him how he plans to fix the mess you two just made. His tone was even, but there was something in his eyes, something cold, something calculating. He wasn't just going to let this go. I hesitated for a moment too long, and he let out another short laugh. Yeah, he said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. That's what I thought. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. We can fix this, I said, carefully measuring my words. There's always a way to fix things. He raised an eyebrow. Is that what Jason told you? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know if Jason even had a plan for this. And if he didn't, we were both screwed. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Daniel's words echoed in my head, reminding me of the mess I was in. The fine print. The clause. The fact that Jason and I had just pulled off a sale that wasn't legally binding, meaning that the money, the deal, the entire escape plan, it was all collapsing before it even started. I kept my phone close, waiting for Jason to call, but he didn't. I wanted to believe he was working on a solution, figuring out a way to smooth this over, but the silence felt like abandonment. If he had a way out of this, why wasn't he answering? My mind raced through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. The buyer could press charges. The money could disappear. Jason could run. And where would that leave me? Daniel barely spoke the next morning. He moved around the kitchen in quiet efficiency, pouring his coffee, checking his phone, watching me without watching me. It was the silence that unnerved me the most. If he had been yelling, if he had exploded in anger, I could have handled that. But this felt like something worse. Like a storm building, waiting for the right moment to hit. I needed to get to Jason. I needed to know what the hell was going on before Daniel made his next move. I'm going out, I said, grabbing my keys. Daniel didn't look up from his coffee. To see Jason? The way he said it, so flat, so certain, made my stomach twist. No, I lied, too quickly, and his lips twitched, almost like he found it funny. I left before he could say anything else, practically running to my car, my heart hammering as I pulled out of the driveway. Jason finally picked up on the third call. Where the hell have you been? I snapped the moment I heard his voice. He sounded groggy, like I had just woken him up. Jesus, Ness, calm down. Calm down. I hissed, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Daniel knows. He found the clause in the will. The sale isn't legal, Jason. We're screwed. There was a pause, too long, too uncertain. What are you talking about? My breath caught. Tell me you knew about it. Tell me you didn't just... Of course I knew, he interrupted. But there was something in his voice that made my blood run cold. Then why didn't you say anything? I demanded, my voice rising. Another pause. Because I thought I could fix it, he said finally, and the bottom of my stomach dropped. How? The word barely made it out. The buyer's not gonna back out, Jason said, his voice more confident now, like he was regaining control. He doesn't know about the clause yet. I can stall, make some adjustments, maybe find a way to get Daniel's signature without him realizing. He's not an idiot, Jason. I nearly shouted. He's already on top of it. He's not going to just let this go. Jason sighed long and slow. Then we have to make sure he does. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I pulled into the parking lot of Jason's apartment, gripping my phone tighter. What are you saying? Silence. Then, come upstairs. We'll talk. I hesitated, glancing around, my nerves making my hands shake. This wasn't the way things were supposed to go. Jason had always been the one with the answers, the one who made me feel safe, but now I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear what he had to say. But I had no choice. I couldn't go back to Daniel without knowing what my next move was. I killed the engine, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. Whatever Jason had planned, I just had to hope it wouldn't make things worse. But deep down I already knew. It would. Jason's apartment smelled like stale coffee and old cigarettes. A sharp contrast to the confidence he always carried himself with. He stood by the window, his arms crossed, watching me as I walked in. Took you long enough, he muttered. But I ignored him, shutting the door behind me and locking it out of instinct. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he had sounded on the phone. The way his voice had shifted into something unfamiliar. Maybe it was the way he hadn't even looked surprised when I told him Daniel knew. You need to tell me exactly what the plan is, I said, crossing my arms to mirror him, trying to keep my voice steady. Because right now it feels like you have no idea what the hell you're doing. Jason smirked, but it wasn't the charming grin that used to make my stomach flip. It was something else. You need to relax, Ness. You're acting like we're completely screwed. I let out a bitter laugh. We are screwed, Jason. We sold a house that wasn't legally ours to sell. Do you even understand what that means? His smirk faltered just for a second. The buyer doesn't know that, he said finally, pushing off the windowsill and walking toward me. And by the time he does, we'll be long gone. My breath caught. What? Jason leaned in, lowering his voice like we weren't alone. I've got a contact. Someone who can help move the money fast. We take what we can, we disappear, and we let Daniel deal with the fallout. My stomach turned. You want to run? The idea hadn't even crossed my mind. I had thought Jason would have a way to fix this, to smooth things over, but this wasn't a solution. It was desperation. He grabbed my hands, his fingers pressing too hard against my skin. Think about it, Ness. No more looking over our shoulders. No more worrying about what Daniel's gonna do next. Just us starting over somewhere else. He was excited, I realized. The thrill of it all, the danger, it was feeding something in him. But for me it was different. My mind was spinning, images flashing through my head. Daniel at the kitchen table, his quiet rage, the way his eyes had seen right through me. He's not going to just let me go, I whispered, and Jason's grip tightened. Then we make him. I yanked my hands away, taking a step back. No, his jaw clenched. What do you mean no? I shook my head, panic clawing at my throat. I didn't sign up for this, Jason. I wanted out, yeah, but I didn't want to run. I didn't want to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, wondering if Daniel was going to track me down. I thought you had a real plan. I thought you were smarter than this. Jason's eyes darkened. You knew what this was, he snapped. You were all in when it was just about screwing Daniel over. But now that there are consequences, you're scared. I stared at him, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I trusted you, I said, and Jason scoffed. Yeah? And you trusted Daniel too, didn't you? Look how that turned out. I swallowed hard, forcing my breathing to slow. Jason was dangerous. I could see it now in a way I hadn't before. He wasn't just reckless, he was desperate, and desperate men made stupid decisions. I needed to get out of there. I need to think, I said, reaching for my purse. Yeah, Jason muttered, turning back toward the window. You do that. He didn't stop me as I walked out, but I could feel his eyes on my back the entire time. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car. I had thought the worst thing that could happen was Daniel finding out. I was wrong. The worst thing was realizing I had trusted the wrong person twice. The drive home felt longer than usual, every streetlight casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement as my mind raced. Jason wanted to run. He wanted me to run with him. That wasn't the plan, not how this was supposed to go. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. He had been so sure, so damn confident that we could just disappear, like Daniel wouldn't chase us, like the buyer wouldn't demand his money back, like we weren't committing fraud. I had trusted Jason to have a way out, but now all I could see was the truth. I was alone in this. I needed to get ahead of it, to find a way to turn this back in my favor before Jason did something stupid. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that Jason would do something stupid. I pulled into the driveway, my stomach twisting at the sight of Daniel's car still parked in its usual spot. A part of me had hoped he would be gone, that I'd have time to figure things out without his watchful, knowing eyes tracking my every move. But of course he was here. He was always 2 steps ahead of me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. I set my purse down carefully, scanning the room. Daniel. I called, my voice softer than I intended. No answer. I walked toward the kitchen, my heart pounding. He was there, sitting at the table, sipping his coffee like he hadn't just dismantled my entire plan in one night. His eyes flicked up to me, unreadable as ever. Long night? He asked, his tone casual, but I wasn't stupid. He was waiting. Watching. I went for a drive, I lied, forcing myself to move, to grab a glass of water so I wouldn't have to look at him. Needed to think. He let out a small hum like he didn't believe me but wasn't going to call me out on it just yet. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. I needed to know how much he had figured out, what his next move was, but I had to be careful. Daniel, I said finally, turning to face him. We need to talk. He took another sip of his coffee, completely unaffected. Do we? My fingers tightened around the glass. Look, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have. He cut me off with a laugh, short and sharp. Messed up. He set his mug down and leaned back in his chair. You sold my grandmother's house. You forged documents. You stole money that wasn't yours. That's not messing up, Vanessa. That's criminal. My stomach twisted at the word, at the cold finality of it. He wasn't wrong, but I couldn't let him control the narrative. I needed to find a way to spin this. It wasn't like that, I said quickly. I didn't. Stop, he interrupted, his voice dropping, his patience wearing thin. Just stop. I don't want to hear whatever excuse you and Jason cooked up. I already know everything I need to know. My blood ran cold. What does that mean? He tilted his head slightly like he was enjoying dragging this out. It means I know exactly what you and Jason were planning. I know about the buyer. I know about the money. And I know that Jason is already looking for an escape route. My heart slammed against my ribs. How? Daniel smirked, and for the first time real fear crept up my spine. Because unlike you, Vanessa, I actually read the fine print. I felt the room tilt, my breath catching. What did you do? He shrugged, completely relaxed. Let's just say Jason's little plan to run? Yeah, that's not happening anymore. My fingers trembled around the glass. Daniel. He stood, closing the distance between us in a slow, measured pace. You should have told me the truth, he murmured, his voice almost sympathetic. Because now? Now you're going to find out what happens when you betray the wrong person. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then back at me, his smirk widening. Looks like Jason just found out. He grabbed his phone and walked past me, leaving me standing there, my pulse roaring in my ears. I had never been more afraid of my husband than I was in that moment. I stood frozen in the kitchen long after Daniel walked away, my mind racing with every possible way this could end. He knew. He knew everything. He had done something to Jason, something big enough that he was standing there smirking like he had already won. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, But I hesitated. Jason had stopped answering me last night. What if he wasn't answering anyone now? What if Daniel had done more than just block his escape plan? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. I had to be smart. If I panicked, Daniel would see it, and I couldn't give him that satisfaction. I found him in the living room, casually sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like this was just another morning. I forced my voice to stay steady. What did you do? Daniel didn't look up, just smirked slightly. You mean besides cleaning up your mess? He finally glanced at me, his expression unreadable. I warned you, Vanessa. You made your choice. My heart pounded. That's not an answer. He leaned back, stretching his arm over the couch like he had all the time in the world. Jason's not going anywhere, he said simply. And neither are you. A chill ran through me. You can't keep me here, Daniel. He raised an eyebrow. Who said I was keeping you here? His smirk widened. By all means, run to Jason. See what's left of him. My stomach twisted. He wasn't bluffing. He had done something I wasn't ready to face. I needed to get to Jason to figure out if we still had a chance of fixing this, but I couldn't let Daniel know how desperate I was. I forced my lips into a thin line. You think you've won, I said, my voice quieter now. You think this is over. Daniel stood up, closing the space between us in slow, deliberate steps. Oh, Vanessa, he murmured, tilting his head. It's just beginning. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. You should read this. I hesitated, then snatched it from his hand, unfolding it with trembling fingers. My stomach dropped. It was a legal document. Divorce papers. My name already signed at the bottom. My head snapped up. You forged my signature? Daniel laughed. You really want to go there? My breath caught. He had me. I had forged his name on the sale of the house. If I fought this, it would only bring more legal trouble my way. He knew exactly what he was doing. You're divorcing me, I said, my voice hollow. He shrugged. I'm cleaning house. He gestured toward the papers. You'll get a fair settlement, don't worry. I'm not as much of a thief as you. His words stung more than I wanted to admit. I needed out of this house, away from him, away from whatever trap he had just set for Jason. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, half expecting him to stop me, but he didn't. One more thing, he said as I reached for the handle. You might want to check your bank account. I froze. Slowly, I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app and felt the air leave my lungs. The account Jason and I had been using for the sale, the one holding the buyer's money, was empty. My hands tightened around my phone as I turned to face him, my throat dry. Where is it? Daniel smirked. Like I said, he murmured, his voice laced with quiet amusement. I cleaned house. I stormed out before he could say anything else, my mind spinning. I needed to find Jason. I needed to know if he had anything left to fight with. Because if we didn't, then Daniel hadn't just won. He had destroyed us. I drove faster than I should have, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly it hurt. My bank account was empty. Jason had stopped answering. And Daniel had been sitting there like a king, watching his enemies fall one by one. I didn't even know how he had done it, how he had gotten to the money, but I knew one thing for sure. Jason was about to lose it. If he wasn't already spiraling, he would be soon. I pulled up to Jason's apartment complex, my pulse hammering in my ears. His car was in the lot, parked crookedly, like he had rushed home in a panic. I barely registered locking my car before I was pounding on his door. Jason. No answer. I tried again, harder. Jason, open the damn door. Silence. A cold wave of dread rolled through me. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. It turned. The door swung open to darkness. No lights, no sound except for my own breathing. Jason. My voice came out weaker than I wanted. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The smell of whiskey hit me first, then something else. Anger. Desperation. Fear. My fingers fumbled for the light switch. When the room flooded with dim yellow light, my stomach turned to ice. Jason was sitting on the floor against the couch, his legs sprawled out, an empty bottle beside him. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair a mess, but it was his expression that scared me the most. Dead eyes. Blank stare. Defeat. The man who had always had an answer for everything looked like he had been crushed under the weight of his own arrogance. Slowly, he turned his head toward me, his lips curling into something that was supposed to be a smile but wasn't. "Well," he muttered, his voice hoarse, "I guess you found out." I closed the door behind me, swallowing hard. What did he do? Jason let out a bitter laugh and gestured to the coffee table. Papers. Dozens of them, scattered across the surface. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the documents, my heart slamming against my ribs as I realized what they were. Bank statements. Contracts. Emails. But the worst one, the one that sent a chill down my spine, was a formal fraud complaint. Daniel had already set everything in motion. Jason ran a hand down his face. He froze the accounts. Every last cent. Not just the house money, Ness. Everything. My breath caught. What do you mean everything? Jason let out another humorless laugh. It means your loving husband had access to more than we thought. He traced every transaction, every move we made. And now, he gestured around the apartment. Now we're broke. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to think. Okay, we can fix this. Jason's head snapped up, eyes flashing. Fix what, Vanessa? He shoved a stack of papers off the table, sending them flying. He owns us now. We don't have the money, we don't have the house. And he's making damn sure the cops see us as the criminals while he plays the victim. I flinched, my mind racing. I had never seen Jason like this. He was unraveling right in front of me. Then we fight back, I whispered, but Jason just laughed again, shaking his head. Fight back how? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Do you have a secret pile of money somewhere? A plan you haven't told me about? He stared at me, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel around Jason. Fear. I took a small step back, and his eyes flicked to the movement, his jaw tightening. You think I'm the problem, don't you? He muttered. You're looking at me like I'm the one who got us into this. He stood slow and unsteady, and I instinctively moved toward the door. Jason, we need to. His phone buzzed on the table. We both turned to look at it at the same time. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Daniel. Jason exhaled slowly, then looked at me. A slow, bitter smirk spread across his face. Well, he murmured, picking up the phone. Let's see what your husband has to say. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. Because for the first time I realized I didn't know which one of them scared me more. Jason answered the call without hesitation, his fingers gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. What do you want? His voice was sharp, but there was something else beneath it. Something I wasn't used to hearing from him. Fear. I held my breath as I listened, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter my ribs. The line was quiet for a second. Then Daniel's voice came through, calm and steady. How does it feel, Jason? Knowing I own you. Jason's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring. You think you've won? He spat. Daniel chuckled, low and amused. No, I know I have. Jason started pacing, his free hand running through his hair as he let out a shaky breath. You set us up, he muttered. You knew what we were doing the whole time. Daniel didn't deny it. Of course I did. I felt my stomach twist, my fingers digging into my palms. Jason had been so sure we had control that we were always one step ahead. But the truth was, Daniel had been playing us from the start. Jason's voice was quieter now, more controlled. But I knew him well enough to recognize the rage barely simmering beneath the surface. So what's your move, Daniel? You gonna press charges? Drag Vanessa through court just to prove a point? My breath caught at the mention of my name, but Daniel didn't take the bait. That depends, he said smoothly. I'm giving you a choice, Jason. You can either disappear quietly, or you can stay and watch what happens when I decide to make your life a living hell. Jason scoffed, shaking his head. You're bluffing. But I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Daniel sighed like he was talking to a child. Am I? Tell me, Jason, do you really think I haven't already sent everything to the authorities? Do you really believe I haven't made sure that the only name tied to those fraudulent documents is yours? My stomach dropped. I looked at Jason, waiting for him to deny it, to tell me Daniel was lying, but he didn't. His face was frozen, his grip on the phone tightening. You son of a... Daniel cut him off. Careful, he warned. You're running out of time to make the right choice. Jason's breathing was ragged now, his body tense with barely contained fury. "And what about Vanessa?" he snarled. "You think she's just gonna stick around after this? You think she wants you?" My pulse spiked. I took a step back, but Jason wasn't looking at me anymore. He was too focused on the man he hated more than anything. Daniel's voice remained steady. "That's between me and her." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "You really think she'll choose you? After everything? After me?" He turned to me then, his eyes wild, like he was daring me to prove him right. "Tell him, Ness. Tell him where your loyalty really is." The room felt too small, the air too thick. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because for the first time since this entire mess started, I wasn't sure what my answer was. Daniel must have sensed my hesitation because his voice softened, but it was no less dangerous. "Don't let him drag you down with him, Vanessa. This is his last chance. But you? You still have a way out." Jason's head snapped toward me, betrayal flashing across his face. "Are you serious?" he whispered. "You're actually considering this?" I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. "Jason." He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "Wow," he muttered. "You're just like him." I turned back toward the phone, my heart hammering. "What do I have to do?" Daniel exhaled, satisfied. "Come home." Jason's entire body tensed. His grip on the phone tightened for just a second before he threw it against the wall with a violent crack. The room filled with silence, thick and suffocating. Then Jason turned toward me, his expression unreadable. "So that's it." His voice was quiet, deadly. "You're running back to him?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The decision had already been made. His face darkened. "You're gonna regret this, Ness." Maybe he was right. Maybe I would. But right now the only thing I knew for sure was that I needed to get out before Jason decided that if he was going down, he was taking me with him. That I turned and walked out before Jason could say anything else, before I could second-guess myself, before the anger in his eyes turned into something worse. My heart pounded as I hurried to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. I expected Jason to come after me, to grab my wrist, to try one last time to pull me back in, but he didn't. He just stood in the doorway watching, his expression unreadable. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Daniel had won. The realization settled into my bones like ice. The money was gone. Jason was finished. And I had chosen the only option left to me. But was it really a choice? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind spinning. I wasn't stupid. I knew Daniel hadn't just let me off the hook out of the kindness of his heart. He had a plan. He always had a plan. And I had just walked straight into it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the house in deep shadows. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the front door, trying to steady my breathing. I had spent so much time trying to escape this place, trying to carve out a new life with Jason. And now here I was crawling back, defeated. My hands tightened on my lap. No, not defeated. Not yet. I didn't trust Jason anymore, but that didn't mean I trusted Daniel either. He had played the long game and won, but I wasn't about to let him own me. If I had to, I'd find another way out. I stepped out of the car, forcing my legs to move, forcing myself toward the house, toward whatever trap Daniel had waiting for me. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. He had been expecting me. Daniel was in the kitchen, standing by the counter with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as I walked in, and for a moment neither of us spoke. His eyes flicked over me, taking me in, measuring, calculating. Then slowly he smirked. "I knew you'd come home." I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing my expression to stay neutral. "You didn't give me much of a choice." Daniel chuckled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "There's always a choice, Vanessa. You just made the smart one." I crossed my arms, hating the way he sounded, so sure, so damn smug. "What now?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Am I just supposed to pretend none of this happened? That you didn't destroy everything I built with Jason?" Daniel arched an eyebrow. "Everything you built?" He took a slow sip of his drink before setting the glass down. "Tell me, Vanessa, what exactly did you build? Because from where I'm standing, All you did was follow a man who fed you lies and let you take all the risks while he sat back and played puppet master. My jaw clenched, but I couldn't argue. Because deep down I knew he was right. Jason had been the one pulling the strings, convincing me to push the limits, to forge the documents, to take the fall if things went south. And I had let him. Daniel stepped closer, his voice lowering. You thought Jason was your escape. But all he did was dig your grave. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. And you? What does that make you? Daniel's smirk widened. The one who made sure you didn't fall in. My pulse pounded. You don't get to act like the hero in this. He shrugged. Who said I was the hero? I forced myself to hold his gaze, even as the air between us thickened. He wasn't angry. He wasn't gloating. He was certain, like he had already planned out every move before I had even stepped foot back in this house. Why did you let me come back? I asked finally. Daniel studied me for a long moment before answering. Because I want to see what you'll do next. The words sent a chill through me. He wasn't finished with me. Not yet. And that terrified me more than anything Jason had ever done. Daniel didn't say anything else. He just picked up his glass, took another slow sip of whiskey and watched me. Like he was waiting. Like this was some kind of game and I was supposed to make the next move. I clenched my fists, refusing to let him see how badly my hands were shaking. You don't own me, I said, my voice quieter than I wanted. Daniel smiled, tilting his head slightly. Don't I? My breath caught, my body tensing, but I forced myself to stand my ground. You think because you won this round, you get to control what happens next? I took a slow step forward, closing the space between us. You think I'm just going to fall in line? Daniel chuckled, setting his glass down on the counter. I think you'll do whatever it takes to survive. His voice was so damn calm, so matter of fact, like he had already decided how this would go. I hated him for it. Hated the way he had picked apart everything I thought I controlled and turned it into his victory. I let out a slow breath. What do you want? Daniel didn't answer right away. He studied me, his eyes sharp, thoughtful, like he was weighing his options. Then finally he said, I want to see how far you'll go. A chill ran down my spine. You've already taken everything. He smirked. Not everything. I swallowed hard, understanding exactly what he meant. This wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't even about Jason. This was about me. About how much damage he could do before I broke. Could run. I could walk out that door and disappear, find some way to start over. But Daniel wasn't Jason. He wouldn't chase me. He wouldn't beg me to stay. He would just sit back and watch as everything around me collapsed, knowing that in the end, I would have no choice but to come crawling back. And that was worse. I lifted my chin, forcing myself to meet his gaze. And what happens when I stop playing your game? Daniel's smirk didn't fade. Then I find a new way to win. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight, my pulse thudding in my ears. He had already won. And he knew it. But that didn't mean I was finished. Not yet. I turned, heading for the stairs, feeling his eyes on my back the entire time. I didn't know what my next move was, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Daniel Carter be the one who wrote the final chapter of my story.